This is TWiT.
Motorola dropped all the deets on the G7 line, their mid-range phone, their entry-level phones. I personally carry a G6, so this may be of more interest to me than it is to most people. But the idea is you're getting a lot of phone for the third of a price of a flagship. The naming is familiar, the G7, the G7 Plus, the G7 Power, the G7 Play, with just enough differences in availability and how they are kitted out to be really confusing. But they all have headphone jacks still. Prices are up about 20% overall, which I have been told it can be pretty much laid in the feet at the cost of components, and they're just getting more expensive. The regular G7, you're looking at a 6.2-inch 2270 by 1080 slim bezel LCD. Ends up being about 403 pixels per inch, which is easy on the eye. It's got a pair, dual 12 megapixel cameras. 8 megapixel selfie camera, 64 gigabytes of storage, a 3,000 milliamp hour battery. I love the fact that they're starting with 64 gigabytes of storage and that it has 4 gigabytes of memory. So that was one of the pain points on the G6 was you could get it with 3 gigabytes in the United States, and they had sort of an upgraded version. I should say like 3 gigabytes and 32 gigabytes of RAM, or 32 gigabytes of storage, and then outside of the United States or through this really weird Amazon purchase opportunity, you could get a 6 gigabyte / 64 gigabyte version. So 8-core Snapdragon 632, which is funny because if you look at people that write a lot about flagships, they're like, the mediocre mid-level Snapdragon 632. But I got to be honest with you. My one performance issue with this phone is the click-to-clunk time when you go to take a picture. But in every other thing I do with the phone, the mid-level Snapdragons are pretty freaking fast compared to any tasks I throw at them. So that's going to be $299. It's on sale in Brazil and Mexico today. It's coming to Europe and the United States later this spring. And again, that's $50 more than the MSRP of the current G6. So the prices have scaled up. $249 gets you the G7 Power, which is running a 5,000 milliamp hour battery. And the G7 Play is still the cheapest at $199. It doesn't have the slick dual cameras. It's got a smaller 5.7-inch screen. And then there's also, if you're listening outside the United States, keep an eye out for the Plus, which was like €300 / $340 US, which gets you like a 16 megapixel dual camera, optical image stabilization, and some other slick features. And that also went on sale in Brazil and Mexico today. So
you talked about camera performance with your G6. What's image quality like? Like maybe it's a little slow, but I mean, is it like
good.
A relatively clean image? Is it?
It's a very bad time to ask me this question because, I bought a Sony a6000
right.
heading into CES because I need to do a bunch more video at CES this year, and I needed really, really good low light performance. I didn't want to have to be using my phone to take video. So right now, I've been shooting a bunch, especially with my boys. They were out riding scooters up front. And the low light performance in this dimly lit street with, I've got this light vacuum of a lens on the camera right now. The sensor is really, really good. The lens is really, really good. So I'm taking amazing photos. So I feel like it is kind of cruel to compare this to what I've been looking at. Or I should say, this actually is pretty good, but it looks like trash compared to the stuff coming out of the A6000. The click to clunk time, like I want to say I went from an iPhone 6s to the G6. And in terms of if there's light, if you have decent lighting, if you're not dealing with, sort of speed-related focusing issues, it's great. I will say the first time I played around with an Android phone for a really long period of time was the last time I trashed an iPhone 1,000 years ago. And the G4 I had, the camera was just unacceptable, really bad. Is this camera in this, $249 phone as good as a flagship phone? No. And it's considerably worse in low light performance. But if you have steady hands and you mostly have a decent amount of light, it does a fine job. Is it as good as anything in the top of the line Google Pixel phone or Samsung phone or iPhone? No. But that's also why I want a dedicated camera.
the last time I used a Moto, well, I think I bought the first generation Moto G.
Right.
And I got the Moto E just because it was $100 and I wanted to try it out. But I was so impressed with, and that was, I think, when Google still owned Motorola. So
right.
I don't know if anything's changed as far as build quality goes. The screens were pretty good. They were not as colorful, like not as rich looking, but there was reasonable pixel density even then. And those were like 1280 by 720, I think, at the low end at the time. But we've gotten to the point now where these like budget conscious phones have high pixel density, probably much improved camera sensors. That was one of the issues with the other phones. Budget phones, you know, in 2014, 15 were pretty terrible. I mean, I don't think anything's ever been worse than my Nexus 4 that had an absolutely atrocious camera. I wanted to love it, and I loved that phone. But I mean, that was kind of like the beginning of Android for me. I had switched from an iPhone to a Nexus 4 at that time, and I've gone back and forth and back and forth. And one of the things about iPhones to me is that they are actually a little slow. You called it the click and clunk time, like the actual time it takes from when you actuate the virtual shutter to when it takes the picture is a little slower than it is on, say, a Samsung phone. And Samsung, it's like their whole photography philosophy is make these photos as like the shutter speed is absolutely outrageous. The ISO is pumped up to, you know, ungodly numbers, and then they do this exposure compensation and boost that's automatic. Like as you take the photo, it's like as soon as you touch the button, it's taking the photo, and then it's like it momentarily processes it, and then you have something that is like twice as bright as the available light that you just shot with. So no way to defeat this unless you go into like automatic or manual settings. But automatic settings on Samsung Galaxy phones, I've been playing around with the S9 Plus off and on for the last few months, and it doesn't matter where I am or what kind of brightness level I have. It's like blown out brightness with every shot. So iPhone more realistic. It's more like what your eye is seeing, but it's a little bit slower. And you know, as I see that one of the specs of this new phone is the PDAF. So we'll have to see what kind of improvements they get with enhanced like focus abilities and like low light. So
makes you think it does. Yeah, I will say as tempting as a flagship phone is, and there are moments which I wish had like the camera out of the Google Pixel 3 or the iPhone XR. 98% of the time, I'm not too frustrated with it. Love that video. Yeah, 4K recording.
Plus, you're not spending $750 to $1,000 or more out of pocket on a device.
That'll probably break.
If you have an active lifestyle,
I seem to have found it. I see with careful case shopping and tempered glass covers, it's been a long time since I broke a screen. So I think I figured out the formula for armoring my phones, which makes them look considerably less svelte than they started out with. But I'll take less svelte over shards of glass in my fingertips, which is just sounds even worse than it is.